The sun was just starting to rise over the airport. It was quiet, peaceful, and cold. Inside the terminal, Ibrahim Traore waited calmly near Gate 37. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't have bodyguards. He didn't carry anything flashy. To most people, he looked like just another African traveler. But this man was not ordinary. He was Ibrahim Traoré, the President of Burkina Faso. He preferred to travel like this, humble, private, and quiet. No cameras, no loud announcements. That's how he moved. He believed in being with the people, blending in, staying grounded. His return from a diplomatic meeting in Europe was no different. He had finished important talks, discussed matters of gold, sovereignty, and Africa's future. But now, all he wanted was to get home. As he walked toward the Air France flight, bound for Ouagadougou, he greeted one of the airport workers in French with a warm smile. "Bonjour, ça va?" The worker smiled back, unaware of who he truly was. That's how Traoré liked it. He boarded the plane quietly, nodded politely at the flight crew, and took his seat in business class, row 2A, near the window. No one noticed, no one cared, or so he thought. A few rows behind him, whispers were already starting. A senior French businessman, the CEO of a major energy company, was also heading to Burkina Faso. He was used to VIP treatment, red carpets, champagne, and first-class everything. But when he arrived at the gate, the airline told him business class was already full. The CEO wasn't happy. He didn't accept no. That's when the drama began to build. Quietly at first. Just a small demand that would soon become a storm. The French CEO wasn't used to hearing the word non. He stood at the boarding gate, surrounded by assistants and airline staff, tapping his polished shoes impatiently. "Je suis un partenaire stratégique de plusieurs projets en Afrique," he said arrogantly. "I'm a strategic partner in many African projects." To him, that meant rules didn't apply. He demanded a seat upgrade immediately. The gate agents scrambled. They whispered. They checked their tablets. But the truth was simple. Business class was full. All seats were taken. Still, the CEO insisted. That's when the airline called over a senior flight attendant. She was tall, white, and dressed in Air France uniform. Her name was Claire. She wore a cold, forced smile as she walked onto the plane to fix the situation. Once inside, Claire scanned the cabin with sharp eyes, like she was hunting for something. Or someone. Her eyes paused for a moment when she saw a dark-skinned man in seat 2A. Ibrahim Traoré sat quietly, reading something on his phone, calm as always. She looked again. No expensive watch. No assistant, no sign of power, just a black man in a hoodie. She leaned toward another attendant and whispered, "C'est probablement une erreur." Probably a mistake. She walked over to him, forced a smile, and said politely, but firmly, "Monsieur, may I see your boarding pass?" Traoré looked up, nodded, and handed it to her. She stared at the pass, then back at him. The seat number was correct, but something inside her didn't sit right. In her eyes, he didn't look like someone who belonged there. Moments later, she returned with a fake smile, this time more direct. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we may need to move you to accommodate another passenger. Would you mind relocating to economy? We will compensate you." There it was, the insult, quiet but sharp. Ibrahim Traoré raised an eyebrow. "And why me?" he asked calmly. "No reason, sir," she said, trying to keep her cool. "Just a small adjustment for our guest." "A guest more important than me?" he asked, voice still calm. Claire didn't answer. She only smiled. Other passengers glanced over, sensing something wrong, but no one said a word. And Ibrahim, he just sat back quietly and said, "No. I will remain in my seat." The tension had started, but the storm was still coming. Claire was stunned. No? A man like him saying no to her? She wasn't used to that, especially not from an African passenger, especially not on her shift. She forced a smile again, but her pride was bruised. "Sir, I insist. This is for operational reasons," she said, with a slightly colder tone. But Traoré didn't flinch. He looked her in the eye. "If it's operational, then please explain why I'm being asked, and not anyone else." Claire hesitated. She wasn't prepared for this kind of calm resistance. Around them, a few business-class passengers were now paying full attention. One man lowered his newspaper. A woman stopped typing on her laptop. Something didn't feel right, but no one spoke. No one dared. The CEO still hadn't boarded yet. He was being held at the gate until a seat was arranged. Claire walked quickly to the cockpit, whispered something to the captain, then returned with a decision. She didn't say a word to Traoré this time. Instead, she approached another black man in business class. Then another. She was clearly targeting only passengers who looked like they didn't belong. That was her second mistake. Traoré sat silently and watched. His face was expressionless, but his mind was sharp. He was observing, calculating, listening. The humiliation didn't anger him, it focused him. A young African man, maybe in his late 20s, looked confused as Claire now pointed at his seat. "You, sir, we need you to move to economy." The young man asked, "Why me?" Claire said nothing, only took his boarding pass. That's when Traoré stood up. "Enough," he said, his voice calm, but heavy with authority. "You are making decisions based on skin, not on tickets. That's called discrimination." Claire turned, a bit shaken. "Sir, I'll have to ask you to sit down. Please don't cause a scene." Traoré looked her straight in the eyes. For a second, her breath caught. There was something about his stare, steady, fearless, powerful. But she still didn't know who he really was. To her, he was just another passenger acting like a troublemaker. She walked off again, fuming inside. To her, this was getting out of hand. "These people," she muttered under her breath in French, "always making noise." The CEO was finally brought on board. Claire greeted him with extra politeness, offering him a glass of champagne. "We're fixing the seating issue, monsieur," she said. Meanwhile, Traoré sat back down. He put on his seatbelt. His fingers calmly tapped the armrest. He didn't need to say a word, because soon the entire world would know what had just happened, and who exactly had been insulted. The CEO settled into business class, like a king returning to his throne. He didn't even glance at Ibrahim Traoré as he passed by him. Claire, the flight attendant, made sure he was comfortable, adjusting his seat, handing him warm towels, and offering him another glass of champagne. The message was clear. You matter. That man does not. The plane taxied down the runway and soon took off into the sky, leaving behind French soil, but carrying with it a moment that would soon shake two nations. Inside the cabin, everything looked normal. Passengers relaxed. The seatbelt signs turned off. But beneath the surface, something powerful was growing. An invisible storm waiting to burst. Traoré remained calm. He didn't complain. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't call anyone or reveal his identity. He just sat quietly, like a man watching a movie unfold, knowing exactly how it would end. Meanwhile, Claire avoided looking at him. Something about his presence unsettled her, but she pushed it aside. Mid-flight, she returned to his seat with a forced grin. "Would you like anything to drink, sir?" He glanced at her. "Water is fine." She nodded quickly and walked away. No apology, no courtesy, no respect. The CEO, on the other hand, was treated like a celebrity. Claire laughed at his jokes, leaned in when he spoke, and asked about his important projects in Africa. He replied arrogantly, "Burkina Faso is lucky to have us. We're bringing order to chaos." Claire nodded in agreement, completely unaware that the very man he was insulting was sitting just 2 rows away. One woman in the cabin, An African nurse returning home to Bobo Dioulasso noticed everything. She shook her head and whispered to her neighbor, "That's our president. They don't even know who they're humiliating." Her neighbor's eyes widened in disbelief, but they said nothing. The president clearly didn't want attention, and no one wanted to break the silence. Hours passed. The lights dimmed. Most passengers slept. But Ibrahim Traoré remained awake, looking out the window at the clouds. He wasn't angry. He was patient, and when the wheels touched the ground in Ouagadougou, that patience would become history. The plane began its slow descent into Ouagadougou. The cabin lights flickered on. The captain announced their approach in French and English. Passengers stretched, fastened their seatbelts, and prepared to land. Claire walked through the aisle with her clipboard, still smiling at the CEO and ignoring Ibrahim Traoré completely. Outside, the view was breathtaking. Golden sun over red soil, the city below waking up as the aircraft glided down. But what no one inside the plane could see just yet was the growing convoy waiting at the airport. Rows of black SUVs, military vehicles, and a presidential escort forming on the tarmac. Inside the cabin, whispers started spreading, only softly at first. "I see soldiers. Are we landing into a war zone?" one foreign passenger asked nervously. No, that's military protocol," another replied. "Maybe someone important is arriving." The French CEO smirked. "Must be for me," he chuckled to Claire. She laughed along with him, already preparing to walk him out ahead of the other passengers. She had even planned to personally escort him to the terminal, but the plane had barely stopped rolling when the entire atmosphere changed. Out the window, the passengers saw presidential guards in uniform, lined up sharply, weapons at their sides, standing in full attention. Behind them stood Burkina Faso's top ministers. The Minister of Defense, the Foreign Minister, even the head of security, all waiting in the heat, unmoving, like statues of power. Claire peeked out the window and gasped. "What is this?" she whispered. The CEO stood up proudly, smoothing his suit. "Clearly this is for me. I told you, I'm involved in big projects here." But before anyone could even step off the plane, a tall officer in a black beret boarded the aircraft. His boots echoed on the floor as he walked slowly down the aisle, scanning every face. He stopped at seat 2A. He raised his hand to his forehead in a perfect military salute. "Monsieur le Président, welcome home." The entire cabin fell silent. You could hear hearts stop. Claire's face dropped, her eyes darting between the officer and the man she had looked down on for the entire flight. Her hands began to tremble. Ibrahim Traoré slowly stood up. Calm, dignified, not a word spoken. The CEO took a step back, his mouth slightly open. President? He stuttered. "That man?" Traoré turned and gave him a simple nod. Not angry, not proud, just a man who no longer needed to say anything. Another officer stepped in. "We have instructions," he said coldly, looking at Claire and the CEO. "You two will come with us immediately." "Wait, what?" Claire whispered. "Why me?" "You are being detained for questioning," the officer replied sharply. "You have publicly disrespected the head of state on national soil. That is a serious offense." Claire tried to laugh nervously, looking around. No, this has to be a mistake. I was doing my job." But no one listened. Traoré stepped off the plane and was immediately met by his people, his guards, his ministers, and a cheering crowd beyond the airport fence. Cameras clicked. The nation's leader had returned. But this time, everyone knew the truth. He had walked among them as a regular man, and those who had judged him by appearance would now face consequences. Back on the aircraft, Claire and the CEO were both being led away in handcuffs. Passengers watched in disbelief as they disappeared down the steps, heads lowered, their arrogance crushed. And that was only the beginning. The tarmac was blazing under the Burkina Faso sun, but all eyes were on the two people being escorted away in handcuffs. Claire, the Air France flight attendant, and the high-powered French CEO. Gone were their smug smiles. Gone was the arrogance. In its place, panic, confusion, and disbelief. They were led into two separate black vehicles, surrounded by elite presidential guards. No one said a word to them, not even the officers. The silence was louder than any shouting. It was the silence of power being reclaimed, of dignity being defended. Inside the terminal, President Ibrahim Traoré stood before a small press gathering. He spoke calmly, without anger, but his words were sharp and unforgettable. In Burkina Faso, we don't look at a man's skin to measure his worth. We don't bow to money or old colonial habits. Here, we respect dignity, humanity, and our people. That is the new Africa. The story spread like wildfire. Videos were leaked online. Footage of the arrest, images of the military saluting Traoré, news clips showing the CEO being dragged away, looking like a child caught stealing. Social media exploded. Has to respect Africa, and Hausbrook, I stand with Burkina, trended globally. African youth across the continent celebrated, cheering a moment they'd never forget. At the Ministry of Justice, Claire and the CEO were formally charged with public insult and discrimination toward the head of state disrespect on Burkinabe soil, abuse of power, and attempted intimidation. The French embassy tried to intervene. Phone calls were made. Diplomatic requests poured in. But Traoré gave a clear response. This is not a colony. This is a sovereign nation. They will face justice, just like anyone else. Meanwhile, Air France scrambled to control the damage. The airline issued a public statement within 24 hours. A clumsy apology filled with corporate language and empty regret. But it wasn't enough. Burkinabe citizens began calling for a boycott. Other African countries joined in. Claire, now locked in a detention center outside Ouagadougou, broke down in tears during questioning. "I didn't know who he was," she sobbed. "I was just following procedures." The investigator looked at her coldly. "You didn't need to know who he was. You just needed to treat him like a human being." The CEO, now facing potential legal action in both Burkina Faso and France, tried to use his influence to escape. But the court made a powerful ruling. No immunity, no special treatment. Let justice be equal. Traoré never gloated. He never once mocked them. He simply returned to the presidential palace and continued his work, building roads, empowering young people, strengthening the military, defending the land. But that moment on the plane became legend. A quiet man in a hoodie, a flight attendant with prejudice, a CEO blinded by pride, and a landing that changed everything.